Hello and good morning or good afternoon or good evening. It's time for another Business Analysis Live. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at the International Institute of Business Analysis. Welcome to 2025. We made it and we are back and talking about business analysis topics. Um, Today, I've got a guest on that I think is really going to get you thinking about your business analysis practices. We often think that there's some myth and magic to the work of business analysis, but really good business analysis practitioners know that the secret sauce is having an approach to doing your work. And you might be thinking, an approach, where do I find that? Is that Agile? Well, I've got a guest on who is going to tell us more about that and actually is going to share a potential framework that you might think about as you're coming up with your business analysis approach. So I would like to welcome Laura Brandenburg. Hey, Laura.
Hey, Susan. Thank you so much for having me. Always good to be here.
Yes, and it's just always good to chat with you. I always feel like we have such good talks, and you'd leave me thinking every time we get together.
Likewise, likewise. More topics than we ever have time to talk about.
I know, right? We got to do like some business analysis live extras. Well, hey, listen, why don't you introduce yourself for those who may not know who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Laura Brandenburg, and I am the founder and CEO of Bridging the Gap, which is an online training company specific for business analysts. And what I feel like really sets us apart is a focus on practical real world application and skill sets. I really look at distilling practices down to their fundamentals, what's absolutely essential, what's going to add the most value, how do you make the most impact in your organization. So I've been a business analyst, I've been a director of a business analysis project management and testing team. I've done business analysis as a consultant, and today I focus mostly on training the next and current generation of business analysts. And it's really fulfilling work. And I'm excited to be here with IIBA and talk more about the framework. So thank you, Susan. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I have followed you for years on LinkedIn. So if you are not connected to Laura, make sure that you do that on LinkedIn because she's always got like good stuff out there. And you have polls and things like that. Because I do think, the more business analysis voices you can have in your in your life, whether they are real or virtual, I think it really can help. So that was a great introduction. Well, let's kind of jump right into this. I mean, today our topic is dun, 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 how a framework transforms your business analysis approach. So maybe the first thing I'll ask is just, what do you mean when you say a framework?
Yeah. Really, it's a sequence of steps or stages or milestones for how you organize your business analysis practice. So it's not the whole project framework, right? It's not the software development framework. It's what do you need to do to be successful as a business analyst? And so I think often we get caught up a bit in what's the project management framework, how is my software team running, and kind of can lose ourselves, right? And we're a profession too. It's a valid, credible role, and so we deserve and need to have a way of working that presents ourselves that way. And not just it part of it is fitting in with all of those other roles for sure, but part of it is also making sure we're bringing best practices and making sure we're adding the value we're there to add.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
that's I think that's a really important point because I do feel like sometimes as a business analysis professional, I have sometimes let my work be defined by my project manager or my
Mhm.
software development team or quote unquote agile.
Mhm.
One of those frameworks. But what we are talking about today is really a possible framework for how we do our work because our work does have value and should have some sort of logical approach to it. Um, so maybe let's kind of explore that for a second. Why should I have an approach if I've got a project manager and a agile? Like, isn't that all I need?
I mean, we need to understand where we fit into those approaches for sure. I also, part of what I see though with BAs who bring an approach, which could be the stages they need to go through, the set of deliverables that they need to create, it enhances their credibility. So you're coming, as opposed to what do you need me to do? The alternative is, here are some practices that I think would be really supportive of this project. How is this going to fit in with what everyone else is doing? Right. So you're bringing those to the practice versus asking for, guidance. It means that you are being proactive and strategic and kind of guiding the BA piece, which the BA piece is often the very first piece. In some cases, it really should even be before the project manager starts working through things, right? It's the value, it's the why are we doing this? And so being strategic and proactive versus reactive and scrambling is another big reason why. And then another thing that I see is that, often we are put on projects and deadlines are set for us, right? Like, okay, or just we're asked for when can the requirements be done? Or they need to be done in 2 weeks or 3 months or whatever that timeline might be. And that is not like coming up with a plan and a practice and a way to guide the approach also allows you to say, here's what needs to be done, here's who I need involved, here's what I think it will take from a time and resource perspective, and really help negotiate some of those deadlines in a value focused, structured way, as opposed to that doesn't seem like enough time, right? Which is never a great way to react to a deadline like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's so right, because very often if we are letting other other roles define how we work, when we say, well, that can't be done, or I don't know how long that's going to take, like we really can do ourselves a disservice, because we haven't, quote unquote, done the math in order to show exactly what it is that we're going to need to do and why we need to do it. You and I have we've been ruminating on this topic for a little while. I know I know I think one of the big disservices that business analysis professionals can do to themselves is um, not not look organized or ready to go. And
Mhm.
I think something like a framework helps you to have a starting place so that it does not seem like magic or an ad hoc effort, but that there's really a set of steps that you may or may not do just based on the context of your project that will, when you implement them, hopefully give you some consistent results, but also will build confidence in yourself, and the organization will have confidence that you can get this work done.
Yeah. And I just want to say a bit about the magic piece, if I can. So I think a lot of BAs get to a relatively experienced or seasoned role, like seasoned, experienced senior role, and like they even believe it's magic. Like that happened to me. I was like, I don't know how to hire a BA. I just am really good at this role, right? And it held me back from being able to hire business analysts, being able to put in place structure that allowed us to be consistent across our projects, that create a consistency among the different BAs in our team, because I thought I just had to hire superstars and trust them to work their magic versus being able to hire somebody who had the right underlying skills and give them a framework to follow that would help them be consistent and deliver high quality work. So I think as you get up to into those leadership positions, not having a framework can kind of keep you stuck in being the only one who can do the things the way you do.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's I think I really understand exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like anything else that we do. So, I've danced for years. And so for me, learning choreography after having danced for 40 years is not a big thing. But if there's a new person coming into class, the choreography can be really intimidating, because not just that the choreography itself is intimidating, but just all of those mental things that you have to have in place in order to learn haven't been built yet. So that makes sense to me. And we do tend to forget that. No, we, as little baby BAs, we probably started with some kind of approach, and then we just practice it a whole lot. And now we just kind of know what are the steps. When do we need to zig when everyone is zagging? That kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
And as a newbie to dance this year, that really resonates with me because I get a little flustered with the choreography for sure.
Right, exactly. And you know what? We were also talking about that process of learning. And that
Mhm.
sometimes when you are whether learning a new thing or incorporating a new thing like a framework, you have to get slower before you get
Mhm.
faster.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think when business analysis professionals understand that what would make them more effective is a framework, sometimes the resistance is, well, we don't have time for that, because it is going to slow you down.
Mhm.
So you got to make the case for, right, we're going to slow down, but because we're going to be learning and we're going to be doing. So
Mhm.
so don't discount the framework because it's going to be slow at the beginning. The value is in consistency and end results.
Yeah. And yeah, some of those pieces, right? The upfront pieces that feel like they slow down, they save you so much time when you get into the details of not rehashing conversations, not dealing with lack of alignment on the big picture when you're trying to figure out like where to put a field. It's just it makes a lot of the decision making at the detailed level a lot easier. But you got to get those big decisions in place first.
Yes, yes, yes. Let's see. I'm taking a look at our comments. Boy, I think we are that idea of frameworks. I like when people are talking about magicians. Yes. Yep. Uh, yeah. Thanks, you guys. And this, just a reminder, we're live today. So, and we are going to save some time for your questions. So please make sure that you drop questions in, and we are going to take those in just a moment. Well, let's see. So I feel like we have been talking about y- frameworks in general. Maybe let's get a little more specific with frameworks. And you are going to do a three-part member webinar for us
Mhm.
on a framework that's coming up in March, is when I think March 19th is the first one. Here I got a banner. It's called the Business Analyst Framework for Success. March 19th. I have that date right. This is week
I would
2 in the
have to
new
check my
year,
calendar.
and I'm and
I
I'm
hope so.
and I'm still kind of slow. Yes, it's March 19th. And actually, I will ask Grimaldo to drop that link into our LinkedIn comments. If you're an IIBA member, you will not want to miss this, because you're going to get Laura in March and April and May, and we're going to talk about this. Why don't you give us a little bit of a kind of a preview of what
Yeah.
that framework is, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yep. Let me just make sure I'm sharing the right window here. Are you able to add that in?
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. So I mean, a great point, Susan, that you have made is right. We all need a framework, and like your organization might provide a framework for you, and you definitely want to tap into that. This A lot of BAs I work with either don't have a framework or they feel like their framework isn't up to the task, right? So I offer this as a starting point for those who might be looking at a framework, or if you have one, what are the pieces that might be missing? So this is our 8-step framework we teach at Bridging the Gap, and it starts with getting oriented of what is my role, what's happened on this project, right? Where are we at, which is so easy to overlook. And then we look at the business objectives. So why are we doing why are we doing this? What problem are we trying to solve? We identify the scope. So what are we actually going to do in the context of this initiative? And then we come up with the plan. That's the deliverables, the deadlines, but very importantly, who needs to be involved and how. That's how I think we can manage expectations with our stakeholders and really build a lot more engagement by being really clear about what they need. And then we get to the piece that takes the most time and often people want us to start with, which to me is step 5 of defining the detailed requirements, right? This is what do you need to be able to hand off to the implementation team so they can build whatever capabilities are under design for this initiative. And we often do spend the most time there, but as we kind of talked about, it goes a lot more quickly when you have all those initial layers set up front. And then, in the old days, this is where business analysis would be quote unquote done, right? We figured out the requirements and we handed them over. Obviously we are in a collaborative, not even just in agile spaces, but always a collaborative space of then how can we continue to support the technical implementation, but also how can we continue to support the business implementing the solution. I've been part of so many projects or seen the end results where like we built all the things that we needed to build, but the business didn't change or didn't know how to change and built these weird workarounds to like that didn't, so we didn't actually achieve what we were set out to achieve. And then finally looking at what value did we create? What is the long-term value of the solution? Where do we maybe fall short? How did our business analysis practice work? What improvements can we make? And kind of looking at that big picture at the end. And often the end leads right back to the beginning, right? What are the new gaps? What are the new problems to be solved? And there we are with additional work to do as BAs to continue on. So that's a quick overview. We're going to do a much, much deeper dive across the 3 webinars of each of these steps.
Yeah, and I think you basically take 3 steps from the framework in each of the 3 sessions. Yeah, so that's how we cover that. So that's going to be a fantastic deep dive into an approach. It is an approach. It is not necessarily the approach. All right, I'm gonna take this down and let's you and I come back onto the stage. If I haven't seen this question in our comments today, but I know you and I, as we were getting ready today, kind of brought this question up. Is the Babcock Guide, is that a framework?
Right. I think a lot of people want it to be a framework, right? And then get frustrated of the iterative cross-reference nature of it and like, well, wait, what do I do first? What do I do next? And, I think you clarified as well, the BABOK is a set of commonly accepted practices. It's what business analysts across the industry, across the profession are doing or have done. And so it's a toolbox, it's a collection of techniques, it's a way of thinking, it's a mindset, but it's not a step-by-step approach. And I think we all need to like look at what's in there and say, what do I need to pull from my organization and my type of project in order to be successful and be effective as a business analyst in this context?
Yeah, so to say it differently, and actually I think I've got a great comment from LinkedIn. The way that you can think about this is that a framework helps to wrap around a set of accepted practices that you can perform in your organization. So I think you need those accepted practices. You need to know the body of knowledge out there that you can include or incorporate into a framework. And so this is okay. Hi, okay. So she says frameworks anchor the analysis process in proven methods. Right. So your framework actually has to be built on something. And so those practices can come from the body of knowledge. So that's providing both structure and flexibility so that business analysts can really deliver value. So it's the combination of those 2 things. If we were to think about, if we were building a house, right, we've got to not just have a set of tools, hammers and saws and all those things. We've actually got to have like an architectural design. What are we building? And so in a way, I think that's how this idea of a framework and accepted practices come together, kind of like that.
And even before you have the design, it's like, what are your needs as a homeowner? right?
Yeah.
And your architect should have a process to engage with you and understand what you want and evaluate the land and the potential and the regulations, right? And like look at all those pieces. And so having that, the set of stages you go through is so essential. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I, we probably have a number of folks that are listening today that are thinking, "Oh, if I have a framework, well, then um, I can't possibly be agile."
Mm.
um, so does having a framework to do in which to do your business analysis work, does that mean that you can't be agile? Are you agile? How do you how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, so a lot of people will look at this framework and think, oh, that means I'm actually not agile because it looks like waterfall, right? And
Mhm.
I didn't emphasize it when we talked through it, but you can go through those steps for a user story. You could go through those steps for a sprint. You could go through those steps for an epic, right? So, an agile is a set of frameworks and approaches for how to do software development. And business analysis is bigger than the software development piece. It is how does that software serve the business, right? And we look at the business processes, we look at the impacts across the business. We might be involving stakeholders from multiple different departments. And I really feel like Agile reduces complexity within the scope of software development in order to like kind of minimize all of that. But like the business analysis still has to happen in an organization that has complexity in their stakeholder groups and their business processes and all of that. So it's really about how do you like, and as I get into the depths of teaching the individual steps, right, there's a lot of nuances inside each of those steps, but one of them is what are the ways that you need to interact with your agile software development team, or your product owner or your scrum master, right? Like how do you interact with those people and how do you make sure they have what they need and fit your practices within their practices without losing the good of what business analysis brings as well. Yeah.
A couple of thoughts here that are
Yeah.
starting to emerge, is, if we're talking about project management practices and frameworks and software development lifecycle and frameworks. One, I think you 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 make me realize that one of the things we have to be thinking about is what are the intended outcomes of those practices. And for the ones that we've described so far, they really don't have anything to do with the kinds of outcomes that we produce. Project managers produce project related outcomes. Now, sure, you can say that there are deliverables that we are part of, but they are intended to be a different set of project outcomes. Software development lifecycle, those also have different outcomes. So it is necessary for us to kind of stake our claim to make sure that people understand the kinds of outcomes that we need to generate and the kinds of outputs that we need to produce in order to get those outcomes. One, so it is really important that we have that. But second, is that we shouldn't be working in a vacuum. We shouldn't say, yeah,
Mm.
forget it, guys. You guys have your own stuff that you've got to produce. I'm going to be over here producing it. That in every way we are a part of those teams. We have to integrate and incorporate our practices into the other things going on because ultimately we share a common set of outcomes. We just produce different things as part of it. So some of this work, as you're thinking about having a framework, you got to do the hard work of analyzing and assessing where do we need to connect in to the other frameworks on
Mm-hmm.
projects.
100%.
Yeah,
100%. You
yeah,
really, you can't just think about your business analysis work in a vacuum, right? So there's a delicate, or maybe not so delicate, but like a push pull tension between what the business analysis work needs to be to deliver those outcomes, as you said, and how you intersect with the team to make it as quick as possible, as efficient as possible, right? So we're not doing redundant work. We're giving people what they need, not more, not less. giving the context that they need, right? You need to definitely have that whole perspective as you're figuring out what your activities are as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, you can apply a business analysis to incorporating a business analysis framework into other frameworks. In fact, I've been part of those processes where we needed to come up with just an organizational approach to how we were doing things. And you've got to look at each of or all of the kinds of activities that are going on. And to your point, what's redundant, because technically in project management frameworks they often talk about requirements. Sometimes those might be deliverables we're producing, they might be something separate, but until we ask uh, specific questions we can't really know, and certainly we don't want to be doing things twice or doing things completely differently. So you've got to have those hard conversations in order to figure that out, because some of these frameworks really do have to be tailored for the organization or the domain that you're working in. I mean, that's the
Mhm,
other piece of this. A framework is only as good as where and how you're performing it.
mhm.
Yep. I tell you what, we have a bunch of questions, and we've got just some great comments in chat. So let's see. Okay. So hi, Indy. I'm going to pull up your question here. Does the framework used differ by situation involved? Does context matter to your framework?
For sure. And this is where the nuances, once you get in it. For me, I teach this as a general set of stages and practices you go through. But like an example of this is the BA might not be responsible for identifying the business objectives. Like they might be brought in either once the scope has been defined or like a business case has been approved, right? And then there's huge resistance to revisiting those. So, like the framework, then you still want to understand the objectives. You still want to make sure you're clarifying scope and poking at them if like things don't make sense, right? But you don't want to be the one who's like, well, I have to do this or I can't contribute, right? Because that creates another roadblock. So, you do definitely need to look at the context of your organization in the context of developing a business analysis plan. Your list of deliverables is going to be very different on an agile project than on a traditional one, than on a project that where software might not even be the major piece. It might be more of a business process improvement project. Your deliverables would be really different. Also, if you're integrating systems, then you're going to have a lot more data modeling, data mapping type work to do. So you really definitely the pieces are contextual. Those are just a few examples of how you might take those milestones and apply them, but apply them in very different ways depending on your context.
I worked for an organization, and we were a small but mighty business analyst and business architect team, and we recognized our limitation was simply in resources. And one of the really great team projects we worked on was identifying the kinds of projects that our organization did, and then by virtue of looking at each kind of project decided these are the kinds of services that we could offer that. And when we thought we might, if you could bring us in at this point, and that service based approach was kind of a framework
Mm-hmm.
that we used. It kind of gave context so that not every, we wouldn't be involved in every kind of project, but for those projects where we could be involved, we we knew exactly the kinds of value that we could produce. That is, you really need allies, and you really need leaders who understand the value of what business analysis can do on projects. But that, I think, is a great that can help you to tailor your frameworks and
Mm-hmm.
you know. All right, so let's see. Okay, here is we know this gentleman.
Hey,
Hello,
Philip.
Philip. Do we have to make the case? I think that's make the case for having a framework. Shouldn't we be
Yeah,
trusted as knowledgeable and experienced professionals to be able to perform business analysis?
sure, 100% in the ideal world. And so I totally get where you're coming from, Philip, with this. And maybe it's just I tend to work with BAs who have less formal experience and who are in organizations that don't have a lot of practices in place yet, right? So that perspective is like, it comes from a place of advocacy. Like there's maybe an expectation that they do the detailed requirements, but not that they're involved in those earlier stages, or that they're kind of told what to do versus defining what to do, right? So in those cases, I think we do have to make the case. We do have to make the case that spending some time getting everybody aligned on why we're doing this first will help us clarify what, right? Or we have stakeholders coming to us with, I'm going to buy this solution from this vendor and figure out how to make it work, right? And so we do have to make the case to take a step back and look at what problem we're trying to solve with that solution. So the real world, unfortunately, is that we are still advocating for our value in some of these ways. And yeah, that's the world I see. And if you have, there are definitely organizations that are much more advanced in their adoption of business analysis, and it's just a given that you are brought in at certain times and you don't have to advocate for that. So, and that's a gift if you are in one of those organizations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I sometimes have felt like some of that is an individual effort. So there might be business analysis professionals in the organization who already have credibility. They are a voice of authority. They've got lots of good connections and relationships, and they get called in. But I think you're right. If you are working on some kind of a new effort and you need to bring in lots of new business analysis professionals, or you are building your own team from folks that are inside your organizations, being able to have that framework already in place. One of the value components of that is that when you have that, you are able to quickly get a group of business analysis professionals up to speed. That in and of itself, I think it can add a lot of value. Well, thank you for that question. All
Yeah.
right, so
Thank
our
you.
next question is from Eric. Does the framework need to be built while we gather requirements? So maybe talk about how we should think about when we would build this, when we would incorporate it into our work.
Yeah, I think it really is from the very beginning. So gather and the term gather requirements can mean so many different things to so many people. Uh, Often I think BAs think of gathering or discovering requirements in the context of that more detailed requirement step. But really often when people are saying gather requirements, I think they mean like the whole thing, right? They mean the business objectives, the scope, the plan, like the whole requirements gathering process is really the business analysis. And so that term has a lot of different possible meanings. But I think we need to come in with some ideas of the framework. And step one is about clarifying your role, clarifying your expectations, understanding who else is on the team. And we would start to build the framework then, knowing that we're going towards the why and the what. And then we would really put a lot of it together in that deliverables list, in terms of what are the specific pieces that we're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm today as we're talking about this, that framework that we're talking about here is the way of working. It is a way
Mm-hmm.
of working. And with Eric's question, asking, does the framework need to be built while we're gathering requirements? What I would say is that framework, assuming that it is that way of working is already in place, that what you might be doing as you are defining the requirements for your project is that you are learning and adapting that framework so that you are doing the things that matter for that project and not doing things that don't matter for that project, because the framework, I think, still has to be,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a living way of working.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that every step leads you to success. It's just these are the steps that we recommend. And based on the context of the project or your seniority or something else, you may need to do more of, less of, none of some of that, some of what's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. All righty, so let's see. All right, we're doing pretty good on time today, and I'm telling you, tons of questions here. Here's our next question. This is from Michael. Every project is a bit different. How do we know which framework works best?
Yeah, this is where, right, the framework is not prescriptive, it's a guide, right? So I think knowing the stages you're going through is always going to be helpful. So the nuances are more in the details than in the steps, right? So as an example, like in the context of discovering the business objectives, is this a process focused problem where I should do a current state analysis and help the stakeholders really illuminate what the problems are? Right? Or is this a new product where I might create a product vision statement or do some user focused research or work with the product manager to understand the market better, right? So that's where like either way, we're understanding the business objectives. The how we get there is going to be very project specific. So I think always knowing those stages and then choosing the techniques within that are going to be the most impactful for your specific project is where really a lot of the intelligence comes in as a VA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That work that we did to understand the kinds of projects our organization was doing, and I think we came up with like 7 or 8 different kinds of projects. I mean, we really
Mm-hmm.
had to kind of go conceptual, but it helped us to know based on the framework that we were using to do our work. When we do a discovery kinds of project, then I am going to do more of the upfront kinds of activities in my framework versus if I'm simply adding a new feature to an existing system, I am probably going to do more of the back end of that. And it really helped us to think about, because we were so small and we needed to think about resourcing, what are the kinds of projects that we can take on based on the kinds of needs they had from us. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have the ability to do that kind of analysis of the work coming in, I think that can really help you to tailor your framework. But I do think it is kind of project by project. But the framework, that way of working, I think it kind of stands. Actually, Ricky adds something to this, which is frameworks actually help in complex projects, making it easy and creates the flow of the project, and can be a great way if you're new to this work. It can be a great way to train new people.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, when you have that. All right. Oh, here's a good question. This is from Sarah. What are the potential downsides of relying too heavily on a framework, and how can they be mitigated?
Yes, this is a good one. Thank you. Thank you. So where this is why I keep referring back to that step one on clarify your role, but that's why I put that as the first step, right? So the downsides I see where, especially when people go through a very like robust training that might be very like have a very abstract full-fledged framework with all these tools and templates and all these techniques that you are supposed to use on every single project, right? Then you become weighed down by the documentation. You become like you're not using your critical thinking to decide, is this specific technique actually needed for my project? Is it going to add value on my project? Right. So when you're too heavily on a very robust and intensive framework, then I think can make you rigid and it can make you unresponsive to how you're working with the team. Right. So mitigating that is having I think a lighter weight framework that gives you those milestones to go through and that helps you navigate the choices that you make within each step to make sure that you're focused on collaboration and adding value each step of the way. So that's my initial answer to that one, Sarah. But yeah.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking about this, we've talked about not having an approach can kind of hurt your credibility, but having too much of an approach can also hurt your credibility because if people see you as an obstacle to getting things done because you're like, "No, I'm still on step 2. We must fill out all of these templates and we must do this step," right? When step 2 doesn't even matter, that can hurt your credibility as well. So, for those new folks, and again, I'm thinking back to like a commercial off the shelf thing I did a million years ago where we had to bring on a bunch of consultants and stuff, and we had a framework. What we did was we recognized that we had new people, either new to business analysis or new to the organization. We made sure that we partnered those folks with more experienced folks so that they could talk through, okay, let's talk about on this project really where you want to spend time and where you maybe don't need to spend as much time, because those kind of coaching conversations help to build that experience. So it's not a here's the framework, do your best. I think you've actually got to apply some coaching and
Mhm.
assistance in order to make these things really work. Let's see. I've seen this note a couple of times, and I'm gonna pull this in, because I know we were talking about business analysis and Agile, and Howard Podeswa, which by the way, he was for 2024. He was the top webinar that we did. So it was a podcast on how to do business analysis, and we when we talked with him about, well, how did you figure out when you were writing that first book on business analysis, how did you figure out what to write? He said, you just have to do it. And I think, and he said, we tried a lot of things, and some things worked and some things didn't. And I just put all of that into the book. And he has since taken that same approach and he's combined it with Agile. So
Mhm.
thanks, Indy. That's a good podcast episode. Let's see. Um, I think I think we are almost out of time. I don't know if we've covered this, but maybe really quickly, we talk about the I don't need an approach. Um, not just because we're
Yeah.
agile, but because, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Let's talk briefly about some myths of the no approach as a way of working.
Well, I think one of them we've seen come up, right, is every project is different, which is
Yeah.
true. And we've talked about that one. Isn't agile or approach, right? We've talked about that one. And we touched on this at the beginning, but I think it deserves really refocusing is, won't this slow things down, right? People want us to jump right into those detailed requirements. And I think this is where, like, really it's the time is right for us to take a stand as BAs and be really proactive about those earlier conversations about the why and the what, and not just to check off, like, oh, I put this in my scope template, although, like, that's an important piece of the step. But, like, do we really have organizational alignment at those objective levels, at the scope? Do we have the buy-in across the leadership? And because that makes things so much faster when you get into the weeds of what we're actually building. So much of the challenges I think we face as BAs are trying to solve those bigger picture problems within the context of a detailed requirement. And really, we just need to step back and get alignment on some of those bigger pictures. And I say just, and that really should be in air quotes because it's the hardest work to do.
It's the
Um,
hardest.
it's the hardest work to do. Uh, but that is what really creates positive momentum on a project. And so when we don't have that, and I've worked on tons of projects where, like, I either didn't realize we didn't have it because I wasn't aware of all the stakeholders involved, or I was pressured to kind of move forward anyways with the we'll figure it out later, or I'll get that person aligned, right? And then it always circles back to cause some sort of issue or challenge later on. And
Yeah.
so it's a great stand to start to take.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, yeah. So bottom line, uh, having a way of working, I think really helps us. And it
Mhm,
helps just the general cause of business analysis, particularly in those organizations where they may have trouble seeing the value. So,
mhm.
oh my goodness. Well, we have had a fantastic conversation today. And it is just a reminder. I know, Grimaldo, if you want to drop that link in again, just so people can, if they haven't had a chance to register for the first part of, Laura's upcoming 3-part series. It starts March 19th. It's called the Business Analyst Framework for Success. We're going to take that framework that we were looking at just a little bit ago. She's going to break it down for you and go into more detail. That is an IIBA member exclusive. So we are super happy that she's going to come and share that with us. Well, Laura, thank you so much. It's always great talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me here. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all in March. And if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well
Yeah.
and reach out.
Yeah, that's right. Connect with Laura on LinkedIn. Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, we are at the end of our time together. We want to thank you guys because boy, I've been looking at the comments and you guys are really into this topic. So I hope to see some of you at the webinar that's coming up. We'll be back in 2 weeks from today, and we've got a host of guests, and we have a guest, and I also have a guest co-host. One of my colleagues is going to step in and help me. We're going to be talking about navigating a strategy change. It's 2025. Your CEO or CIO has decided where you're going to go, and then oops, it all changes. And as business analysis professionals, how do you react to that? Well, we're going to have a case study for you and talk about what happens when that happened to one of our partners. So we want to thank you guys again for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks from today. Thanks. Bye bye.